everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we're going to talk about the decimal system. And I love talking about the decimal system because it is really amazing what 3 and 4-year-olds can grasp and understand. It's amazing that they can understand not just units, not just tens, not even 100s, but 1000s. They can understand the place value up to 10,000 before they even get into kindergarten. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to start this video, we're going to switch over to my other camera and I'm going to give you a presentation on how we introduce the quantity and the symbol for 4-year-olds in the Montessori classroom. So here we have what I call the presentation trays for the decimal system. We have a presentation tray for quantity, that's the golden bead system, and we have a presentation tray for the symbols. Now in Montessori, we always start with the quantity. We always do quantity before symbol, so I'm going to set the symbols aside. So there are 2 main basic parts to introducing the decimal system. The first part is the 3-period lesson where we introduce language. And then the second part is the Bring Me game. When I give this presentation, I have the child sitting next to me and we go through each part starting with the units. This is a unit. And when I show the unit to the child, I usually let them roll it around a little bit. We want them to be able to feel it. This is a concrete sensorial experience. That's one of the reasons why 4-year-olds can understand the decimal system is that it's concrete. So being able to feel it, letting them roll it around in their fingers is an important part of the lesson. Then we're going to set it on the table in front of us. Some Montessorians like to have an extra mat out. That's up to you. Having something to keep it from rolling is probably a good idea. This is 10 units. We're going to take our unit bead and we're going to count to show that there are 10 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 units. And again, we want to have that sensorial impression, that concrete experience of 10 units in contrast to 1 unit. So it's important that you give the child a chance to feel this. Let them count it themselves. Let them go through that experience. And then we'll set it down next to our unit. Next, we're going to do 100. This is 100. We can use our 10 to count to 100. 1 10, 2 10s, 3 10s, 4 10s, 5 10s, 6 10s, 7 10s, 8 10s, 9 10s, 10 10s is 100. So we're going to show them that 10 10s is 100, and 100 makes this beautiful square. Again, let the child explore it. Let them hold it. Let them see that this unit can become 10 units, and then 10 units can become 100. So this is 100 right here. And then right here, we have 1,000. 1,000. Let me show you what 1,000 is. We're going to take our 100. We're going to count 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. So 10 of these make 1,000. And this is a really fun one because it's not just bigger, but it's heavier. So not only do they see the size and can feel the size, but they can feel the weight between 1,000 beads and 1 unit. So we have this impression of the decimal system as we're going through it, that's what makes this work. This is a really important part of Montessori, is this concrete experience of understanding the decimal system in a very concrete and sensorial way. So now that we've introduced this, we're going to move on to the next part of the 3-period lesson. Now, usually when we do the 3-period lesson in Montessori, we're only doing 3 materials. That's pretty much the usual. But when it comes to the decimal system, when it comes to introducing this decimal system, we introduce 4 materials at the same time. But I will say this, it is really hard to introduce all 4 of these at the same time. I have a lot of students who have struggled with it. So if you feel the need to take one away and just focus on this, feel free to do that. It's always okay to reduce your lesson plans to make it easier for your students. So don't be afraid to reduce your lessons to make them a little bit more simple. If you're seeing that they're not grasping all 4, take one away. So when we're doing the 3-period lesson, we're going to play a little association game. We've already introduced the language, so now let's go ahead. Maybe we'll mix this up just a little bit. Let's see, can you point to 100? Can you move 1,000 over here? Can you move the unit over here? Can you pick up the 10? Can you count the 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can you move the unit right here? Can you move the 10 right here? Can you move the 100 right here? And can you move the 1,000 right here? So you can play lots of different types of association games. You can have them touch it, move it, put it behind their back. You can make it as physical as you need to for that student. Just keep in mind that you're associating the language with the correct object. And if you notice that they're not getting it right, like if you say, can you pick up the 10, and they pick this one up, we don't correct them. We just let them set it back down. Just make a note of that, make an observation that says, well, they didn't quite get it. And that might be when you decide next time to reduce the number of items that you have out and say, you know what, we're only going to work with these 3 today. So if you see that they're not quite getting it, don't correct them, just come back to it next time, maybe do it a little differently. Now, the third part of the 3-period lesson goes by really quick, and it's simply asking, what is this? What's this called? Can the child recall the language for this if you ask them? What's this? What's that called? That's 100. What's this called? 1,000. What is this? This is 10. So if the child can move through that, if they can move through the language pretty quickly when you ask them, they're really ready for what comes next. They're ready for the Bring Me game. So in the Montessori environment, we have what's called the bank, and it's a shelf of golden beads, and we have a shelf full of units and 10s and 100s and 1,000 cubes, and these are so exciting to touch. The moment the child comes in the classroom, these are the things they want to pick up. They want to touch them. And if you ever have problems with the kids touching this before they have a lesson, something that I usually give them to do is to dust them. If they need to put their hands on it, I show them how they can pick it up. I show them how they can touch it. And then maybe we just get a little duster and we dust them. So if they're not ready for the bank game, if they're not ready for the decimal system, but they really just need to touch these beads, give them something to do. Give them a job. Give them something that they can do that's purposeful and that treats the materials with respect. So they've been looking at these for a year now. Now they finally get to work with them. What we're going to do is we're going to have them pick up a tray. So they'll have a nice big tray. And let me put this back in my presentation tray. So we're going to have a nice big empty tray for them. And I'm going to sit far away from the bank game shelf. And I'm going to sit and I'm going to ask the student to bring me something. And I might ask them to bring me 3 10s. And when I ask the child to bring me 3 10s, when they go to the shelf, there'll be a box full of 10s. And so they're going to count 1, 2, 3 10s. and they're going to take the 3 tens out. They're going to put it on their tray. They're going to bring it to me, and I'm going to say, what did you bring me? And hopefully they're going to say 3 tens, and then we'll count it. I'll go 1 10, 2 tens, 3 tens. You brought me 3 tens. Now notice that I'm saying 3 tens. I am not saying 30. When we start the decimal system, we do not say 30. That comes a little bit later, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Right now, we're just going to use the language 1 10, 2 tens, 3 tens. And there will be a point when we switch over to the proper language of saying 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. So once they do that, I can send them back to the bank. They can put these away, and they can come back to me, and they'll be ready for the next number. And I might ask them to bring me 500. I might ask them to bring me 6 units. I might ask them to bring me 9,000. And that one's great. If you have children that need that weight, that need to carry something heavy, having them bring you 9 cubes is wonderful. So this is a really great game for children who really need to have a chance to carry something with some weight. And this is really important if you have a child with certain sensory disorders or sensory issues. They might have a need for carrying something that's heavy, and this might be a great game to get them involved with. So that is the second part of introducing quantity. The first part is introducing the language, playing that association game, and then the bring me game with these numbers is just a more intense version of that second period of the 3-period lesson. After we introduce the quantity, we're going to introduce the symbols. So the child's already been working with the quantity. They feel comfortable with the quantity. That's when we introduce the symbols. And we're going to introduce the symbols with a similar presentation tray. We're going to do 1 unit. We've got the 1 right here. The 10. The 100. And the 1,000. Now, you'll notice that we are doing the exact same thing. We have 1, 10, 100, 1,000. So we're going to go through the same procedure, but this time when we do this, we're going to say this is a 1. Now, the child is already familiar with 1, right? Because we've already done the numbers 1 through 10. That's what the child had just finished working on. So 1 through 10 should be pretty familiar at this point in time. 10 might still be a struggle, but it's something we've introduced in the first math group. So really what we're introducing here is 100 and 1,000. But sometimes, again, they get very confused between some of these numbers. So if you have to reduce it, feel free to take one out and just focus on 3 of them. It's always okay to reduce your lesson plans. But let's introduce this. We've done the 1, which they've already had in their numbers 1 through 10. And then we can do the 10. Say this is 10. And how many zeros does 10 have? 10 has 1 0. And we'll do the same thing for 100. This says 100. And how many zeros does 100 have? 1, 2. It has 2 zeros. This is 1,000. How many zeros does 1,000 have? 1, 2, 3. Now, as you're introducing it, it really is important to point out how many zeros each one has, because that's the importance of the decimal system, right? Those zeros tell us how many places are in each category of the decimal system. So it's really important that we start counting those zeros. Every time we ask for a card, we're going to count those zeros. So once we introduce the language like we did, we can play that second part of the 3-period lesson of association. You can ask them to point to, pick up, move, whatever you want to do, whatever gets them active in associating the language with the material. We're going to do that again, but this time we're just going to do it for the symbol, and we're going to remember to count the zeros each time. So if I say point to 1,000, and I'll say, well, how many zeros does 1,000 have? 1, 2, 3. It has 3 zeros. So just incorporate those zeros into your 3-period lesson. Now again, when we go through this, you can mix them up. For the 3rd period, we're just going to say, what's this? And they should be able to tell you that's 100, 1,000, 10, and 1. Now, I don't usually show this at first, but if you need some motivation, you can show them the magic slide. This is always our favorite part. Ready? Ta-da! And then we put it back on the presentation tray. It goes back on the shelf. That magic slide is my favorite part, and it is always my students' favorite part too, so make sure to incorporate that. So anyways, that is how we introduce both the quantity and the symbol. And again, we work on these individually. We start out with doing them separately, but we do combine them together as soon as this is solidified. So when they can do the quantity, we introduce the symbol, and once they have the symbols down, we're going to move to the next part of this lesson, which is the association of beads and numbers. Okay, so now that we have introduced quantity and symbol, I am going to give you a rare treat. I don't usually allow anyone to look into my Montessori albums, but today I'm going to show you some of the diagrams from my math album. So here we are at the next lesson for introducing the decimal system. We've done quantity, we've done symbols, we've introduced both of those concepts separately, and now I'm going to show you how we put them together. And this lesson is called the association of beads and numbers. For this lesson, we're going to set out two mats, and we're going to have two types of materials. We're going to have our cards, and then we're going to have our golden beads. And as you can see, this is the layout. We're going to have our cards with the units up to 9, the 10s up to 90, the 100s up to 900, and then we have the 1000 card. And the same thing is going to happen with the golden beads. We're going to have our units laid out, our 10s, our 100s, and a 1000 cube. So we have two mats here, and now that the child understands each of those concepts separately, we can start putting them together. But we're not going to put more than one category together at a time. So once we've set up our mats with both the quantity and the symbol, just like this, I'm going to start asking my student to bring me one category at a time. So for instance, I'm going to ask the child to bring me 3 10s in both quantity and symbol. So when they bring their tray over to the mat, they're going to pick out 3 10s in the quantity, that is the golden beads, and then 3 10s in the cards. And when they bring their tray back to me, it should have 3 10s, and it should have the card saying 3 10s. Now, it's important to note that in AMI Montessori training, we don't say 30 yet. We don't use that language yet. So for right now, the language is still 3 10s. And that doesn't change until we get to the next part of our lesson. That's when we change the language for this. So the child will bring me 3 10s in both quantity and symbol, and I'll say, what did you bring me? And the child hopefully will say 3 10s, and we'll count the 10s, 1 10, 2 10s, 3 10s. And then we'll look at the 3 10s in the cards, and I'll say, how many zeros does 3 10s have? And of course, we'll say 1 0. So we're going to start out doing this one category at a time. And then when that becomes really easy, we're going to start doing 2 categories. So for instance, I might ask for 5 10s and 3 units in both beads and cards. And then they'll take their tray over to the 2 mats. They'll get their 5 10s and 3 units in both cards and in beads and bring it back to you, and you'll go through it again. And this is where it can get tricky. So if you have a bad memory, you really have to make sure that you, as the teacher, remember what you sent them to get. And I'll be honest, that is the hardest part of the lesson for me. So we will keep going through this until we build 3 categories. When you start working with 3 categories like that at a time, this can take a while to work through. So you have to be a little bit patient. And I'm just going to give you a tip right here. If you have a child that's older, if you have a child that isn't 4, this is going to become very tedious to them. They don't want to put the extra work into this concrete material. Their brains are changing over to the abstract. So if you're finding that you have a student, you want to introduce this to them, but they're maybe around 6 years old or a little bit older, this isn't going to appeal to them. I mean, it could. I don't want to say that it can't totally, but most likely this movement of going back and forth is not going to be as interesting as it is for a 4-year-old. So keep that in mind that when we're introducing this lesson, this is typically for a 4-year-old who needs a lot of movement and needs that concrete involvement with the materials. An older child is not going to have the same attachment to this. So if you're noticing it's an older child and they're kind of rejecting this lesson, you may have to think of ways to modify it so there's not quite as much concrete, or you have to maybe move through the concrete a little bit faster or a little bit differently than you would for a 4-year-old. So just keep that in mind, that this is really meant for that 4-year-old age group, and that's why the 4-year-olds do really well with it. But if you're doing an older child, you might have to push through this and get more to something like the stamp game to understand the decimal system. So once you've solidified 3 categories at a time, it's time to move on to 4 categories, and we have a special name for this lesson. We call that the formation of large numbers. So right here you can see the progression that's going on. At first we started out with just that simple 1 to 2 categories at a time, right? Bring me 3 tens and 5 units in both quantity and symbol. Then we move on to 3 categories. Bring me 100, 4 tens, and 3 units. And so now we're working with 3 categories at a time. And then when we get to the formation of large numbers, something's going to change. We're going to ask for 4 categories at a time. So we'll say, bring me 1,326. 1,300, 2 tens, 6 units. When we get to the formation of large numbers, we're going to start putting it all together, and we're going to start using the proper language for the tens. So instead of asking for 2 tens, we're going to ask for 20. We're going to ask for the entire number, and we're going to use the entire language all together. So we're going to ask for 1,326 in beads and cards. So this formation of large numbers is a pretty big deal, and this is the last step before we introduce addition. That's right, we're going to go straight into addition after this. We're going to move into doing both static and dynamic addition after we get the formation of large numbers. Now, another thing also starts to happen at this time. As we start getting into the formation of large numbers, we also start working on our teens, tens, and linear counting. So we're going to start introducing the quantity and then the symbol for the teen numbers and then the tens numbers. We're going to work on quantity right there, and then we'll introduce the symbol. So we'll start introducing the symbol once the quantity has been solidified. And then we're going to start introducing the quantity and symbol together. So it follows that same format, just a little bit different material. And then same thing with the tens board. It's the same type of material, just looks a little bit different because we can make tens with it. Then we introduce linear and skip counting with the bead chains. So as we get into the formation of large numbers, we're also introducing teens, tens, and linear counting, and of course skip counting with the bead chains. So that's all I'm going to do for today. In the next video though, I'm going to show you how to do addition, both static and dynamic, with the golden beads in a way that a 4-year-old can understand.